One thing I find is that there's a bit of a sort of sweet spot in terms of consistency of the paint. You don't want it too runny that it goes everywhere, but you do want it sort of fluid enough that it will sort of almost drop off the paintbrush, if that makes any sense. So here we go. We're going to try and give you guys a clear view whilst doing this. So again, you only want to touch the very tip of the paintbrush. I've probably got a bit too much on there. There you go, and I don't know if you can see that. Let's see if we can get that working a bit better. Excuse me. But I've done the left eye, as you can see, and you can see that white in there just about. Let's try and do this a bit better. So yeah, can you see that? Yeah, there we go. You can just about see the white section if I stop moving my fingers around. We're going to repeat that on the other side. Okay, move on. To be honest, the minute I put the headset on, you can see so much more clearly that this becomes actually not as difficult as you might imagine. And so the trick is to just get the right amount of paint on. And so let's see if we can get this camera working a bit better today. You'll end up with something like that. Hopefully you can see that. And we'll come back and deal with that a bit later. Now, what we're going to do obviously is put a little black spot in there when this has dried. There is at that point another opportunity to tidy up, really. And I probably would recommend that if you're going to go back over with the base flesh, that you wait until that sort of stage. Just because it gives you a chance to deal with any problems that you've created by using the black. What I'm done there with my finger is just to take it off the top sort of eyebrow area that I caught on the way in. You're trying to just really touch the paintbrush just very lightly against the figure. That's the trick with this. And less is definitely more. So if you catch the white paint to any degree, I'm tempted to say leave it, because obviously in terms of scale, a human eye it is quite difficult to see on this type of figure. Sorry, this scale of figure. And certainly you don't want to be making it too big. Quite often people don't bother to paint the eyes. I just feel like there were two reasons. One, you know, people have eyes and it doesn't feel right not to give the figures the eye. This one actually has got a patch over his eye, so we only got one to paint, which is great. So yeah, it's all about making it feel realistic, but also it will make a very subtle difference to people who happen to look at your figures. What I've done there is a little bit too much, so that one will be one that we will be tidying up. Now what's happening now is that I've been using the paintbrush for quite a while, so it's just starting to collect a bit too much paint. So I would thoroughly recommend, if you're doing more than the batch that I'm doing, give the brush a clean and keep that tip as sharp and as pointed as you can make it. So while that white is drying, what we're going to do now is move on and start to do some of the other areas that we haven't painted yet. So as I said, for this guy, I've got the purple underside. I'm going to put teal as the first colour of armour. Not sure what this is going to do, but as I said, this is an opportunity just to mix things around a little bit. This is almost like fantasy painting because we're concentrating on just such a small number in a sort of historically themed but not particularly historically accurate, if that makes any sense, sort of gaming mechanism where we've got, as far as Test of Honour is concerned, this paint is not great. As you can see, we've got a little bit of lumpiness going on there, so I'm going to use it anyway. What I probably will do after we video this is I'll put some water in there just to lighten that up and give it a good old mix. One of the problems I find with the Foundry system, and you can see it here, is that the actual paint cover itself will split, and that tends to lead to excessive drying. If I had the time and the inclination, what I would do is decant all of these into sort of dropper style bottles. And anyone from Foundry is watching, that's the only thing I criticise about your paint range, is that management of it is a little bit more challenging. So let's move that to one side. I think I'm going to stick with the headset. And again, what I'm trying to do is get into the inside areas of the armour, trying to avoid overpainting anything else, but not worrying so much about that we don't get to cover the armour itself. Now that area there I'm going to leave because that's lacing, and we are going to come back and do the lacing on this top section. But the section nearest to the waistline tends to be all lacing. Now I don't know if you can see, and this occasionally happens, but I've discovered a little bit of metal there that I haven't actually cut off. So what I'm going to do whilst we're at this stage is retrieve a set of clippers, if I can find them, and just snip that off. Just bear with me a second. Now you could leave this on, but for me, it's once I've seen it, I just can't leave that. And if you're going to remove it, now is as good a time as any, because believe me, if you spot that in a few weeks' time, you'll be regretting the fact that you didn't get rid of it. And now, even though we've created some bare metal there, we're virtually going to cover that with our armour paint anyway. So there's very little lost at this stage by just tidying that up. And perhaps the only thing I would recommend is do not use paint as thick as the one I'm trying to put on here now, because we want to get into the recesses of the armour and not obscure too much the lacing. And it may not look it, but this is actually still quite pliable as far as armour goes. You know what, we've got another little section there, excuse me, I don't like the look of. We'll get rid of that. This is a case of less haste, more speed, I think, because I know I'm in a hurry about painting these, but really that was poor checking on my part. You can see the lacing effect still just coming through there nicely, so we haven't lost any detail by putting this on. Okay, you don't have to do the upper arm pieces in the same colour, but I'm going to do that on this occasion. And there's always like a little elbow patch there. Look, we'll get that one coloured in as well. And again, try not to go over the armour, but if you do happen to go onto the purple, you're keeping that sort of overrun to a minimum, and you should be able to sort of touch that in without too much concern. There is a little sort of gauntlet section, but this has actually got effectively a banding around it to tie it on, and these are gloves, so we'll be leaving those. There's a sort of gorget type affair there. We'll keep that going in this colour. I'm going to get inside there and not worry about the tassels. We'll come back and sort those out. While this is going on, I'm sort of thinking about what I should do about the hat, or the helmet, sorry. The helmet, again, could be the armour colour, or it could be different. I think just because I'm in a sort of speed mode at the moment, trying to get these done, I'm going to do it the same colour. I think there's going to be enough differentiation with the coat that I won't need to worry too much about that. And there's that sort of armoured section there. And again, this is really just the base coat of the armour. So there'll be an opportunity to rectify any sort of omissions a bit later on, but I'm just trying to get clear definition around the join between the clothing, if you like, and the armour itself. And I'm pretty pleased with that. So just going to line in here. The actual sort of disky crescent arrangement there, I'm going to leave that till a bit later. Quite often these inner pieces of the helmet were decorative as well, or decorated as well, so we'll have a think about that a bit later. But again, just for now, I'm going to get some paint on. And here, what I'm trying to do here is concentrate on the bits that have got the plate, in terms of the armour plates that are all joined together. So we'll just run down there. We'll actually on this occasion leave that banding, or that tasseling, or that lacing, as it more accurately I should be calling it, connected like that. And although these strips on the top look like lacing, they're not actually lacing, not normally anyway. That would be almost like a reinforcement or decoration band. Natural lacing is this bottom section where you've got the overlapping plates that you can see. So again, we're just making sure we're getting into all the different recessed parts of the figure in terms of the armour. If you can't reach something, then I tend to have a number of different techniques, trying to reverse the paintbrush angle like that. But as I said, one of the beauties of the black undercoat is that you can leave it, because 99% of the time it will just look like a shadow rather than anything that you've missed. Okay, that's for this stage, that's good enough. So sorry if that, I can't tell exactly how clear that was on the camera, but that's the sort of effect we've got so far. To be honest, that's probably enough time for the black paint to have dried. Sorry, for the white paint to have dried, so that we can now dot in our black eyes. And I think I want to do that because it is one of the more difficult things. So I'm just going to clean my brush properly, get the point back nice and shaped, and then do the eyes. Right, so just while we talk about eyes, I do a white under, surround, if you like, the main part of the eye, and then a little black dot to indicate the pupil. And this is one of those where you definitely don't want to be too runny with the paint. And lots of people sort of tend to put, iris colours on and all sorts of things. I mean, honestly, I challenge anyone to actually see that sensibly without some sort of high-res photography thing going on. And I think if you're going to do white with a black dot, from a visual sort of perspective, at the sort of distances we're talking about and the sort of normal eyesight view, that's going to give you very much an impression of an eye without driving you nuts in terms of what you're trying to paint. So let's get the headset back on. Let's try dotting a few eyes. I always do the right eye first. I really can't tell you why. I did read that once that it's just more natural because you can see that eye when you're dotting it in. And I don't know if you can see that, but I've kept that very light in terms of the dot that I've put in. And actually, I'm quite pleased that you're probably struggling to see that in a good way, because it means I haven't gone too crazy with either sets of paint, either the white or the black. Sometimes when I've got the black out, I will sort of go around and sort the facial hair out, etc. But I think it's important as well to just keep progressing with the eyes. So I'll maybe come back with that shortly. Just make sure that I've got rid of this more difficult job. And again, if you've painted the right eye and you can see it, what you want to do is try and balance where you've put the dot on the same sort of position, if you see what I mean, on the opposite side, so that it's either not got the two eyes facing different directions. Putting the headset on does actually reveal quite a lot about some of the areas of the figure that I should need to improve. So to be quite honest, what I've got into the habit of doing is painting the figure to all intents and purposes, and then coming back and having a look at what I've been able to achieve. And again, what I'm doing is making sure that the paint doesn't dry out. We keep it sort of in that sort of consistency where we can touch it on without having to blob it on like a piece of plaster. Keeping the point of the brush up, as it were, and making sure that we get the eyes aligned so that they're staring in a natural way. You don't want to be doing too many of these in one go. If you tend to put a little bit more white in the surround than the black dot in the middle, if you see what I mean, you'll get a slightly stern or staring effect. And as long as it's not crazy, I don't mind that when it happens, because these guys are supposed to be going into combat. Now, I don't know if you saw that, but I put far too big a blob on that one. So we're going to keep that one out because we're going to have to redress that one. And to be honest, this is why I don't like doing too much of this, because there's a number that you do where you've got your eye in, as it were, no pun intended, and you're in that sort of rhythm, but you haven't got tired in terms of the hand position. Okay, not too bad. You will get difficult ones like this one, where we've got a weapon in the way. So try and do what you can. you know, and it's perfectly acceptable not to paint the eyes, to be quite honest. But there we go, that's done that one. So, okay, how would I deal with this one here where I put too big a blob on? Well, you may remember that I created a little bit of a problem for myself because I mixed the paint rather than use the base coat because I wanted it to be a little bit darker. So if I get my Oriental Flesh colour here, we might get away with just, excuse me, taking this out the top of the tin and just closing around that area, and I'll have a look at it and see whether I'm going to make this too light by doing this. That's it. Actually, I've got rid of that quite nicely. So okay, that's done that. I'm going to really just, what you're trying to do there is, if you do bleed it out too much, just try and get the original base colour back, and sort of touch up to the eye just to shrink it down a little bit. And I've been able to do that on that one. So again, we'll give that chance to dry. What I'll do is I'll move on to, I think I'll put the different type of armour on this one. So if you remember, I put the Storm Blue on this guy. And I was going to try a different thing with almost a terracotta feel. So terracotta starts off pretty brown. So we'll shake that up. We'll get another little pot, sorry, another little receptacle going here. And we'll try getting his armour on him as well. Oops. It's a good start, isn't it? Putting your finger in it. I don't know what it is about this terracotta colour from Foundry, but it is one of my favoured paints. Sometimes find that I never really have much chance to use it, but it is a good colour, and it's a good coverer. So interestingly, here we've got a sort of segmented armour sort of effect. I think if I had more time, I'd very much consider darkening this front section and then trying to pick out each of the individual sections. But as we haven't got the luxury of too much time, I will reserve the sort of picking out of those upper sections, or those segments, sorry, when we put the mid coat and highlight coat on. But if you want to leave a few lines like that in the model just to help accentuate the banding, it's no bad thing. So it's almost like a leather colour when it first goes on. And again, we want to steer clear of this section where we've got lots of lacing. But the rest of it, oh, look at me, and there's another little bit where I've neglected to be as diligent as I could have been with the cleaning up of the figures. We just make sure we get the edge covered off on there. But if you don't cover it right up to the next section, that's fine, as long as you've got some black undercoat or dark undercoat in there. Otherwise it will just stick out like a sore thumb. And again, we've got some lacing that we're going to have to pick out a bit later on, and that's fine. And it depends on how the models are sculpted. This one's got quite prominent lacing, which will make life a bit easier when we come to picking out that detail. when I come to choose the colour for lacing, the default would be white, but there were plenty of suits of armour with blue lacing, green lacing, yellow, gold, well, yellowy gold anyway. So really, especially with these being a small group, we'll take a look at the colour and then we'll try and get something which really contrasts well. If you've ever seen real suits of armour, they are pretty mixed in terms of the way that they're coloured and laced. And it's always a good idea to go and look at, if you can anyway, the real life subject or different examples. Plenty of museums around hold suits of armour. But I think I can already feel that this is going to look quite impressive when we actually come to picking out the raised areas with a mid and a highlight, and also when we come to put some lacing on. Again, there's an elbow pad there. And sometimes things will happen. I've realised while I've been painting this one, for example, that I didn't necessarily, I'm not sure that I painted the shin guards on this first figure. So we'll have a look at that one. I've still got the paint over there, albeit drying quite hard. But again, if we want to really mix the figures up, I could just use this colour on it. And that wouldn't be too silly. Right, and again, we'll just drag the brush over those raised areas. Make sure we get under there, no gaps. And I'm trying to leave the lacing there actually, as I said earlier, so that's fine. There isn't anything particularly more difficult about a samurai figure, but when you add up all of the different areas of the figure that need to be painted with a bit of care, like the armour and the lacing in particular, it's very segmented, unlike a lot of figures that you might paint. That's why I think people regard them as difficult, just because it's the amount of concentration and effort involved. Not that any one particular thing is any better or worse than another figure. Right, so I should have remembered to do these on that last figure. So we will have a little look at him in a minute. Not sure why we've got a knee guard there and not on this side. Maybe it's something to do with the figure simulating somebody who, stepped forward with a left foot forward type guard, and therefore bit like the way that certain troops from the ancient period only wore one greave. Maybe there's a bit of that logic going on here where they've just got an extra bit of coverage on that knee. Before I move on, obviously we need to do this helmet. And again, I'm going to leave that front device to be something more decorative. Okay, as far as we go at this stage, that's pretty good. I did indeed neglect to do this one. I don't think I want to do that with the terracotta, so what we'll do is just simply revisit the teal. That paint is really in need of a bit of help. It's not a paint I've used very often, as you can tell, so perhaps not surprising that years of neglect have seen the paint pot dry out a little bit. And again, we've got over here, we've actually got two knee sections, so I don't know whether that figure is just not sculpted, or that previous figure is not sculpted properly, as it were, or we just assume that it was to do with fighting style and stance, which is what I'm going to tell myself, because I'm not going to repair the figure when I'm in a bit of a hurry. I have, just for information, you can just get bits of green putty and pretty much add them to a figure, but you best need to do that really on the bare metal. You don't want to be doing that when you start to paint the figure, because it's just not going to take. So right, I'm going to sort this paint out now, put some water in it, give it a good shake. Then I'm going to have a little think about some of the other figures in this group and join you shortly. Right, I think I said I was going to use sort of more black armour for these guys, just to differentiate them from the two leader figures. So I've retrieved a couple of colours of interest really. I've got a black grey here from Vallejo, and I've got a Foundry Charcoal Black 34C. What I'm going to do again, because if you look at the way that I've done the undercoat here, which has not been, as dark as perhaps it could have been, we've got some sort of sections where we're still quite light, and I think if I just put two, if I go straight for the the highlight, this sort of colour, that's just going to look silly and grey. So I'm going to try and put a little bit of that with the black grey, just to be a little bit lighter but not too light, if any of that makes sense. We'll pop a bit of that in there, and you can see that that is noticeably lighter than a straight black. I'm going to retrieve a new cocktail stick, give this a dotting like this, and we'll get a sort of midway point. Let's have a little look at what this looks like on the figure. You know what, not too bad. I think I said as well I was going to put some oily steel in here, so I think there'll be a second pass at these. When when I try and get any sort of highlighted colours on them, what that will include is a bit of oily steel. But this is actually looking quite silver here, so I'm quite keen to get this covered with a dark colour. And it may be on this bottom section, but I should have used black again, or gone straight for the Vallejo blue grey, black grey. But again, colour variation isn't something I'm worried about on these figures particularly. And perhaps looking at this one, I should have gone back and just primed that with a proper black. But I'm kind of committed now because of time, so I'm sure we'll make this work. I thought for a minute this here was an additional flaw that I've left on it, and in fact, whether it's supposed to be on the figure or not, I don't like that there, so we're going to get rid of that. Excuse me. Okay, and that's probably too brutal for the likes of, for my liking. So very much want to get a darker section in there. If there's one takeaway from this painting video, it's make very sure that you get your base coat properly. Now this one is too grey for me. That's feeling more like a mid coat than anything else. So I'm going to have a little look at this one, see what we can do here, see if I'm happy with just picking out this top section. The black armour, I know it's going to sound ridiculous, should be black, not grey. I don't mind using a colour like this actually, just to pick out the sort of higher up, well, just to sort of highlight it really, for want of a better phrase, but we're not really talking highlighting, we're just talking about picking out the detail. So I'm developing a little bit of thinking about what I'm going to do here, and what I'm going to do is live with this, and then just maybe as an illustration of how you can recover things, I'm going to leave this section's this colour, and then I'm going to put a little black ink over it and see what I think of that before properly highlighting post what I've done. Okay, and I'm going to do similar kind of thing on the hat. And again, looking at this colour now, that's not quite as dark as I'd like it. So that's going to get some attention from a bit of black ink as well. what I tend to do with these conical hats is when I put a mid and potentially a highlight coat on, I tend to draw it into the center of the hat like that, just to try and accentuate that pull towards the top. So I'm not going to bore you folks, I'm going to get round and do the rest of the armour pieces. Then when that's dry, we'll have a little look at some inking. See you shortly.